Anno 117 Pax Romana promises to take us to the heart of the Roman Empire, in an era of prosperity, but also of intrigues hidden beneath the surface. But not all that glitters in Rome is gold, and today we're going to talk about 10 things they didn't tell you about this new chapter in the Anno series. Get ready for secrets, controversies, and details that could completely change the way you see this game. This is one of those curiosities that show the developers' affection and consistency with the series' own history. When you realize that the number 117 follows the tradition of the sum of its digits being 9, you understand it's not just a technical detail, but almost a symbolic ritual for the franchise. It's as if each new Anno were a piece of a larger puzzle that respects those who have been following from the beginning. I've always found it incredible when a game series maintains this kind of hidden pattern because it shows that an identity is being built over time. In Anno's case, this goes beyond the numbers. It's almost like a signature from the creators, a way of saying, you are playing a true Anno. It's not something that changes the gameplay, but this kind of cohesion provides a sense of familiarity and belonging to the player. The most curious part is how this 9 became a kind of good luck charm for the series. Since Anno 1602 through 1404, 2070, and 1800, they all follow the same logic, and this helps create a tradition that few games manage to maintain. It's such a discreet Easter egg that many people only discover it after years of following the series or out of curiosity from other fans. And when you notice it, it's impossible not to smile at the ingenuity behind it. The number 9, by the way, has always had a certain symbolic weight in various cultures. It represents perfection, the completion of cycles, something at its peak. This fits with Anno, which always talks about civilizations at their maximum point of development. Deep down, the choice makes total sense within the game's theme, even if it's a disguised mathematical detail. I like to think that Anno 117 Pax Romana, by maintaining this tradition, is not just entering the history of the Roman Empire, but also reaffirming the series' own heritage. It's as if, by playing, you feel like you are participating in this numerical timeline that crosses centuries, both inside and outside the game. This kind of detail is what transforms a good franchise into something truly memorable. For over a decade, people had been commenting on forums, videos, and social media about how incredible it would be to see the series' strategic and economic style in a setting as grand as ancient Rome. It seemed like a distant dream, especially since the last titles had explored very different periods, like the industrial and futuristic eras. When Ubisoft Mainz finally announced Anno 117, many people had that finally feeling. And it wasn't just because of the setting, but because the studio showed it was truly listening to its fans. After so many requests ignored or set aside in other franchises, seeing a collective wish fulfilled in this way was something that rekindled the enthusiasm of veteran players. I've always found it fascinating how the Anno series manages to reinvent itself while respecting its own DNA. In each era visited, the game changes the technological and cultural context. But the essence of management, construction, and strategy remains firm, and seeing these elements transposed to the Roman Empire is something that naturally fits the spirit of the game. Rome is the civilization that practically invented the concept of organized management and expansion. It almost seems like this setting was waiting for the Anno series to reach it. Roads, aqueducts, colonies, and maritime trade, all of this is fertile ground for the franchise's classic mechanics. And the most beautiful part is thinking that this setting was born from a real desire from the community, something built with patience, nostalgia, and love for the previous games. This curiosity about the pleasure barge is one of those things that show how much the developers cared about historical details. Basing the vessel designs on the legendary Nemi ships built by Caligula was a perfect choice to portray the more luxurious and eccentric side of the Roman Empire. These real vessels were practically floating palaces, filled with marble, statues, and extravagant decorations, something that fits perfectly with the game's grandeur. When I noticed this reference, I could see it wasn't just a visual touch. It's a way of showing how power and pleasure went hand in hand in ancient Rome. Caligula, known as much for his madness as for his taste for luxury, became a symbol of this excess, and placing an element inspired by him within Anno 117 creates a very rich connection with the atmosphere of the time. The most interesting thing is to think about how this historical detail gives depth to the game's world. Instead of just building generic boats, the developers drew inspiration from something real, loaded with symbolism. The Nemi ship brings that classic contrast between the splendor of civilization and the excesses of the Empire, something that has always been present in Anno games. The balance between progress and decadence. These vessels, in real history, were recovered from Lake Nemi in Italy after centuries submerged. Knowing that they really existed and now find new life within a game is fascinating. It's as if the Ubisoft mains team is resurrecting a forgotten part of Roman history, but with a creative touch that only a construction and management game can offer. I love it when a studio manages to mix historical authenticity with imagination so naturally. This Caligula-inspired barge isn't just an ornament. It represents the spirit of the game as a whole, a balance between the splendor of imperial Rome and the keen eye of someone who understands that even luxury can be a tool of power and cultural identity. I found this new feature of Anno 117, allowing the choice of the starting province to be sensational. For the first time in the series, the player can begin their journey in very different regions, like Latium or Albion, and this completely changes the tone of the game. It's the kind of freedom that makes you want to restart just to see how the game adapts to each choice. And it shows how much the developers are interested in offering more personal experiences within the same universe. Latium, with its hot climate and sunny landscapes, represents the heart of the Roman Empire. You can imagine lavender fields swaying in the wind, elegant villages, and that more contemplative, almost paradisiacal rhythm. It's an ideal setting for those who like to build slowly, focusing on harmony and prosperity. Everything seems to breathe calm and civilization, which fits the classic style of the Anno series. Albion, however, is another story. A damp, mysterious region steeped in Celtic atmosphere, located on the northern border of the Empire. This setting conveys an air of challenge and discovery, as if you were bringing Roman culture to a wild and uncertain territory. It's the kind of scenario that seems to invite the player to deal with resistance, adverse weather, and a constant feeling of isolation. Almost a metaphor for the limits of the Empire. I really like this duality because it brings a very strong cultural and climatic contrast to the gameplay. On one side, the familiarity and splendor of Rome. On the other, the harshness and raw beauty of distant lands. This initial choice changes not only the landscape, but also the pace of your expansion and the way you connect with the world around you. It's a decision that seems small on paper, but one that transforms the player's experience into something more personal and immersive. Choosing where to start is, in a way, choosing what kind of empire you want to build. And seeing Anno embrace this idea for the first time gives new life to the series. As if with each new game, you were writing your own story within ancient Rome. This idea of governance decisions in Albion is one of the most fascinating and daring parts of Pax Romana. By allowing the player to choose between Romanizing the local peoples or preserving the Celtic traditions, the game inserts a dilemma that goes far beyond resource management. It touches on cultural, ethical, and even philosophical issues. It's as if the Empire's expansion ceases to be just a matter of power and starts to be a reflection on identity and coexistence as well. Romanizing Albion means imposing the Empire's standard with all its organized structure, its imposing architecture, and its efficient trade routes. It's the path of order and stability, but also of domination. The local peoples begin to live under Rome's rules, and material progress grows quickly. However, you can feel that moral weight of, in a way, erasing millennia-old traditions to make everything fit into a single mold. On the other hand, preserving Celtic cultures brings a completely different dynamic. Here, the player accepts diversity and the mixing of cultures as part of the administration. The buildings, rituals, and even resources reflect this more organic, albeit less predictable, coexistence. It's the type of choice that can make centralized control more difficult, but which generates a sense of authenticity and harmony with the environment. It's as if you were allowing the Empire to grow in a more human, even if more chaotic way. What I find brilliant is that these decisions directly impact the gameplay. Resources change, citizens' behavior adjusts, and even the economy reflects the type of dominant culture. This makes Albion a living region where the consequences of your choices become visible in a much more tangible way than in any other title in the series. It's not just aesthetics, it's intertwined politics and strategy. For me, this mechanic symbolizes the maturation of the Anno franchise. It no longer limits itself to building beautiful and efficient cities, but invites the player to think about the kind of ruler they want to be. In Albion, progress comes with a price, and deciding which civilization flourishes says much more about you than about the empire you are trying to build. One of the details that most caught my attention is the city layout. The fact that buildings follow rectangular patterns with straight streets and 90-degree intersections isn't just a visual whim, but a direct reflection of Roman urban rigor. It's impressive how the game managed to translate that sense of order and rationality that guided the Empire. When you start planning your city and realize that everything fits together geometrically, you can understand why the Romans were so obsessed with structure and control. These cities with central forums and perfectly aligned streets were more than a symbol of civilization. They were a declaration of power. By imposing this same model even in distant regions like the Celtic colonies, Rome showed that its culture was non-negotiable. And seeing this reflected in the game is almost like observing the empire's expansion in real time, only through your own hands. It's that kind of detail that makes the player truly feel in the role of a Roman administrator. Something I really liked is how this architectural precision contrasts with the nature of the wilder regions. While Roman territory breathes symmetry, other areas maintain a more organic layout, full of curves and small imperfections. This visual difference communicates history without needing a single word. It's a smart way to show the meeting and clash of cultures within a simple urban organization. Building this way brings a sense of control and power, but also of responsibility. Everything needs to be in its proper place. Temples near the forum, well-positioned squares, well-distributed main roads. The player ends up getting into this methodical rhythm of Roman engineers, and this transforms even the simple act of aligning a road into something almost meditative. You feel like you are helping to make your city worthy of the empire. In the end, the rectangular layout is much more than aesthetics. It's a philosophy. It's Rome telling the world that chaos could be tamed by reason, and Anno 117 translates this brilliantly. It's this balance between historical authenticity and a sense of control that makes the experience so engaging. Every city you build seems to tell a story of power, culture, and identity. This level of detail in citizen behaviors in Anno 117 is the kind of thing that makes the city feel truly alive. Seeing small gestures like people smelling lavender in flower fields or reacting spontaneously to the environment creates an incredible sense of authenticity. It's the kind of touch that transforms the scenery into more than just a set of buildings. It starts to breathe, to have a soul. And when a strategy game achieves this, you can feel the care and attention involved in the creative process. The idea of seeing citizens committing dramatic acts, like setting houses on fire in reference to the Great Fire of Rome, brings an unexpected layer of humanity. It's almost poetic, this way of transforming historical tragedies and customs into small events within the game. It's not something that directly influences the city's efficiency, but it deepens the immersion and places you inside the Roman world in an almost cinematic way. Each citizen seems to have a routine, a story, an emotion that manifests subtly. When you zoom in the camera and observe the buildings, the visual details are jaw-dropping. Cats moving discreetly through alleys, subtle reflections on skins, and the texture of aged wood make everything seem tangible, almost palpable. You can feel an atmosphere that mixes beauty and realism, that rare sensation of watching history come to life, not just through architecture, but also through small, everyday gestures. These details, inspired by historical artifacts, show that Ubisoft Mainz went deep in its research. It's the kind of authenticity that isn't achieved just with beautiful graphics, but with an understanding of Roman daily life. Its colors, its sounds, its smells. Even the way citizens interact with elements of the environment, like lavender and markets, contributes to this sense of liveliness. Everything seems carefully thought out to immerse the player in this time and place. I really like it when a construction game bothers to go beyond the cold structure of management and brings human warmth to the scenery. These details give personality to the empire you are creating and make every zoom in become a small discovery. In Anno 117, Rome isn't just a civilization, it's an organism in constant motion, full of stories for anyone who wants to stop and watch. This choice of protagonist in Anno 117, Pax Romana seems to me one of the most personal and interesting changes the series has ever made. Having the option to play as one of two siblings, Marcus Naucratius or Marcia Tertia, brings a completely new emotional layer to the campaign. It's a human touch within a franchise that has always focused on managing empires and now starts to also explore the management of people, and especially of family ties. Marcus, the youngest son of a family of imperial granary supervisors, represents that hard-working profile, used to dealing with the common people and the practical side of administration. You can imagine a character closer to the empire's needs, with a more technical and less political outlook. Marcia Tertia, on the other hand, is the opposite in many ways. Destined for a political marriage, she lives the dilemmas of a Rome where power is inherited as much by lineage as by alliances. Playing as her completely changes the tone of the choices and dialogues, which makes the narrative richer and more unpredictable. What's interesting is how this duality reflects the very spirit of Rome, the balance between duty and ambition, between tradition and freedom. Each of the siblings carries a different weight of Roman society, and the game seems to use this to immerse the player in moral questions that go beyond pure strategy. You aren't just building cities, you are trying to find your place within a complex political and family structure. These differences aren't just in the story, but are reflected in the gameplay. The decisions you make, the contacts you establish, and even the way other characters interact with you vary depending on the chosen protagonist. This makes you want to play the campaign twice to see how the narrative routes and consequences unfold. It's a very intelligent way to add depth without changing the game's genre. I found the way Anno 117 introduces the starting island of Juliana very interesting. Named in honor of Emperor Lucius's wife, it already begins loaded with historical and symbolic meaning. The fact that this island was the scene of the destruction of the city of Ambrosia due to the eruption of the old Ocassus volcano creates a melancholic and richly atmospheric setting. It's a touch that gives the player the feeling of stepping on ground with history in a place that holds the scars of the past. This choice by the developers to include a natural tragedy inspired by real episodes like the destruction of Pompeii is a smart way to give context without forcing the player to deal with it directly. It's there, in the scenery, in the ruins you find, in the marks of time that tell silent stories. Even those who play just for the management and expansion system feel this historical backdrop, which adds a subtle layer of immersion. The island of Juliana also symbolizes rebirth. By starting your journey in a place that has already seen a civilization be destroyed, the player ends up taking on an almost spiritual role of reconstruction. It's as if every building erected and every road traced is a way of returning life to a forgotten territory. This feeling of restoring a fragment of the empire gives an emotional motivation to what, in other games, would be just an initial phase. The detail I like is that this story is completely optional. You can ignore it and follow the flow of the gameplay without any penalty. But, for those who pay attention, there's an enormous charm in this. The game rewards curiosity with small stories hidden in the landscapes, in the broken statues, in the plaques, and in the echoes of the past. It's that kind of world building that doesn't impose itself. It just exists, waiting to be discovered. Juliana, with its tragic past and recovered beauty, represents the tone of Anno 117 well, a balance between power and fragility, between glory and ruin. Building there is almost a metaphor for the Roman Empire itself, grandiose, but always in the shadow of much greater forces. These subtle lore details show that Ubisoft Mainz doesn't just want to take the player back to Rome, but to make them feel the stories engraved in the stones of the Empire. The inclusion of Voada in Anno 117 Pax Romana is one of the most intelligent and charismatic additions to the game. She functions as a living symbol of Celtic resistance, clearly inspired by Boudica, the queen who challenged Roman rule in Britannia. In sandbox mode, this character completely changes the pace of the game, because she isn't just a common enemy or ally. She is the personification of the tension between conquest and culture, a direct reflection of the impact that the player's decisions have on the world around them. If you choose to suppress Celtic culture, Voada becomes a true force of opposition, attacking trade routes and sabotaging your advances. These moments make the Empire feel less secure and controlled, reminding you that political actions have real repercussions. Suddenly, your administrative choices gain emotional and strategic weight. Every attempt at Romanization is accompanied by the shadow of resistance. It's a brilliant way to give personality to the consequences. On the other hand, if you decide to preserve Celtic traditions, the figure of Voada transforms. She ceases to be a threat and becomes a valuable ally, representing something rare in strategy games: diplomacy based on cultural identity and mutual respect. This optional relationship creates a huge sense of satisfaction, as the alliance isn't won through force or economy, but through political sensitivity and empathy. I really like how this mechanic goes beyond the simple traditional alliance system. Voada is unpredictable, and her dynamic posture reinforces the central theme of Anno 117, the balance between control and coexistence. She represents the voices that Rome tried to silence, but that never completely disappeared. Even in victory, her presence reminds the player that empires are not maintained by strength alone. It is necessary to understand the peoples one governs.